My parents didn't help me with my studies, so they bought a new car for $40,000 for my sister, and then when I became successful they came to lend money for her wedding after they didn't help me and didn't take an interest in my life. Growing up, I always thought my parents were fair. I mean, they weren't the richest, but they made sure we had what we needed. Or at least, that's what I believed. But everything changed when I turned 18 and told them I wanted to go to med school. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table, excited and nervous, showing them the letter of acceptance. "I got in," I said, holding the letter like it was my golden ticket. "I just need your help with tuition. I'll pay you back, I swear." They didn't even look happy. My dad sighed, and my mom glanced at my sister, who was scrolling on her phone like she didn't care. Then Dad said, "We can't help you, son. Money's tight." I was confused. I knew things were tough sometimes, but they always seemed to manage. "Tight?" I asked. "But you helped Sarah with her college fees last year." Mom looked at me with that "end of discussion" face she always used. "Your sister needed help. And we've been saving for other expenses." I was about to argue, but then Sarah chimed in. "It's not like you have to go to med school, you know. You could do something cheaper, like IT or business." That's dumb. I wasn't asking for luxury. I was asking for a chance. Later that evening, I found out what those other expenses were. Dad came home with a brand new car for Sarah. It wasn't some second-hand junker. It was shiny, expensive, and way out of their usual spending habits. That's when it hit me. They weren't out of money. They just didn't think I was worth the investment. I was furious, but what could I do? They made their choice, and it was clear I wasn't part of it. That night, I stared at my acceptance letter, wondering if it was even worth it. How could I afford med school when my own parents wouldn't back me? The next day, I made up my mind. If they weren't going to help me, I'd help myself. I started applying for jobs, anything that would pay. I ended up working as a builder for a local construction company. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't what I dreamed of, but it paid enough to cover community college classes while I saved for med school. The first day on the job was brutal. I wasn't used to that kind of labor, carrying heavy bricks, mixing cement, working under the scorching sun. My hands were covered in blisters by the end of the shift, and I could barely move the next morning. But I didn't complain. I couldn't. Every ache and bruise reminded me why I was doing this. I wasn't just building houses. I was building a future. Meanwhile, my parents and Sarah acted like everything was normal. Dad would boast about Sarah's new car to the neighbors, and Mom kept asking me when I was going to get serious about a career. I wanted to scream, "What do you think I'm doing?" But I kept my mouth shut. I knew they wouldn't understand, and honestly, I didn't need them to. I just needed to keep going. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. My routine was brutal. Wake up at 5 a.m., work a 10-hour shift at the construction site, then take night classes at the local community college. I was exhausted all the time, but I couldn't stop. I had one goal: get into med school, no matter what it took. At work, the older guys used to tease me. "What's a kid like you doing here? Shouldn't you be in college or something?" they'd say, laughing as I wiped sweat off my face. "I'm working my way there," I'd tell them, and that usually shut them up. But it wasn't just the work that was hard. It was going home every night and seeing Sarah living her best life. She'd park her shiny new car in the driveway, talk about how easy her classes were, and complain about how boring her weekends were. Meanwhile, I was breaking my back to afford a single semester. My parents didn't seem to notice or care. They never asked how I was doing or if I needed help. The only time they brought up my job was when Dad said, "At least you're learning the value of hard work." Hard work? I wanted to yell. I was drowning in it while they handed everything to Sarah on a silver platter. But I bit my tongue. I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. The only thing I could do was prove them wrong. After about a year of working nonstop, I finally saved enough money to transfer to a better college. It wasn't med school yet, but it was a step closer. I'll never forget the moment I got the acceptance email. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, exhausted after a long day, when my phone buzzed. "Congratulations," it read. "You've been accepted for pre-med studies." I just sat there, staring at the screen. For the first time in a long time, I felt like all the sleepless nights and long hours were worth it. I wanted to call someone and share the news, but who? My parents didn't care, and Sarah would probably make some sarcastic comment about how long it took me to get there. So I kept it to myself and celebrated quietly. The next morning, I walked into work with a little more energy. Even when the foreman yelled at me for being slow, I didn't care. I was finally on my way. When I told my parents about the acceptance, their reaction was underwhelming. "That's good," Mom said, barely looking up from her magazine. "Just don't forget to keep working," Dad added. "You don't want to end up in debt." Sarah didn't say anything at all. She was too busy taking selfies in her new designer outfit. I didn't expect them to throw a party or anything, but a little enthusiasm would have been nice. Still, I didn't let it bother me too much. I'd gotten this far without their support, and I didn't need it now. Getting into pre-med was just the start of a whole new set of challenges. Balancing work and school was harder than I ever imagined. I'd leave the construction site covered in dirt and head straight to class, sometimes skipping meals just to keep up with assignments. There were moments when I felt like quitting. Like the time my car broke down, and I had to walk 3 miles in the rain just to make it to class. Or the time I got sick but couldn't afford to miss work because I needed the money for textbooks. My parents? They didn't ask how I was doing. The only time they called was when they needed something. "Hey, can you send us a little money for groceries?" Mom asked once, as if I was rolling in cash. I wanted to say, "I barely have enough for myself." But instead I sent what I could. I didn't hear from them again until a few months later when Dad needed help fixing his truck. Meanwhile, Sarah was living in her own world. She'd post pictures of her vacations, her fancy dinners, and her new outfits, all while I was eating instant noodles in my tiny apartment. She never asked how I was or even noticed what I was going through. Once, I tried venting to my mom about how hard things were. She cut me off mid-sentence. "Well, you chose this path," she said. "Sarah's life is easier because she made smarter decisions." Smarter decisions? Like blowing through their money and not having a job? I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just hung up the phone and got back to studying. The calls from my parents became more frequent, but they always had the same pattern. They'd start with small talk, acting like they cared, but it never took long for them to get to the point. They needed something. "Your dad's truck broke down again," Mom said during one call. "Can you send some money to help with the repairs?" I was in the middle of finals and hadn't slept in 2 days. I was broke, exhausted, and barely keeping it together. "Mom, I don't have extra money right now," I said. Her tone changed immediately. "Well, you can't expect us to handle everything by ourselves," she snapped. "Your sister's busy with work and can't help either." That was the part that pushed me over the edge. Sarah was too busy? Busy with what? Posting pictures of her new shoes? Booking spa appointments? I started avoiding their calls after that. Every time the phone rang, it felt like another reminder that I was only useful to them when they needed something. Meanwhile, the pressure at school was building. I failed a major exam because I couldn't focus. I started falling behind on assignments, and had to cut back on work hours just to catch up. That meant even less money, and I was barely scraping by as it was. One night, I sat in my apartment staring at my bills, wondering if I could keep going. It felt like the whole world was stacked against me. But then I remembered why I started this journey in the first place. I wasn't doing this for my parents or Sarah. I was doing it for me. After that moment of clarity, I pushed myself harder than ever. I stopped answering calls from my parents altogether. I didn't have the time or energy to deal with their constant demands, especially when I knew they didn't really care about me. I focused on what I could control, my studies. I spent every spare second in the library, taking notes, reading textbooks, and practicing for exams. Slowly, I started catching up. My grades improved, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was making real progress. But life had other plans. During one of my shifts at the construction site, I slipped while carrying a heavy beam and twisted my ankle badly. I couldn't walk properly for weeks, let alone work. My paycheck barely covered rent that month, and I had to dip into what little savings I'd managed to build. When I called my parents to let them know what had happened, hoping for at least some sympathy, all I got was indifference. "Oh, that's too bad," Mom said, not even trying to sound concerned. "By the way, your sister's thinking about getting a new car. She was wondering if you could help her find a good deal." I couldn't believe it. "Did you hear what I just said? I can't even walk, and you're talking about Sarah's car? Well, we just thought you'd know more about those things," she said dismissively. That was it. I hung up and didn't call them again for months. The months of silence from my parents were honestly a relief. Without their constant calls and demands, I could finally focus on myself. My ankle healed, I returned to work, and eventually, I saved up enough to finish my pre-med studies and apply to med school. When I got my acceptance letter, it felt surreal. After years of struggle, I was finally on the path I dreamed of since I was a kid. I sat alone in my tiny apartment, reading the letter over and over, letting the reality sink in. I didn't tell my parents right away. What was the point? They'd only find a way to bring it back to Sarah or ask for something. Instead, I threw myself into med school. It was even harder than I expected, but I didn't care. I made it this far, and I wasn't going to stop now. The long hours, the sleepless nights, the constant pressure, it was all worth it because I knew I was building something for myself. Every now and then, I'd hear from Sarah through social media. She was still living her carefree life, posting pictures of vacations, fancy dinners, and endless shopping sprees. Part of me resented her, but I also knew she'd never been pushed to do more. Mom and Dad had always given her everything, so why would she change? As for my parents, they'd stopped calling altogether. At first, it stung, but over time, I realized I didn't miss their calls. I didn't miss the guilt trips or the endless comparisons to Sarah. For once, I felt free. It had been months since I'd heard from my parents. I figured they'd moved on, maybe too busy with Sarah or whatever. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. At first, I thought something serious might have happened. Why else would she call me now? I picked up, and she sounded unusually cheerful. "Hey, honey! How are you doing? We've missed you so much." I wasn't buying it. Mom didn't call just to catch up. "What's going on?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Well, Sarah's wedding is coming up, and things are a little tight financially. We thought since you're doing so well now, you could help out a bit." I just sat there for a second, stunned. After all those years of struggling, the first time they call me, it's to ask for money, for Sarah's wedding, of all things. "You're serious?" I said. "You wouldn't even help me pay for school, and now you want me to pay for her wedding?" Mom sighed, like I was the one being difficult. "It's not like that. You're successful now, and it's your sister's big day. We just need a little help." I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Are you kidding me? I worked my ass off for years with no help from anyone, especially not you. And now you expect me to just give you money? No way." Her tone shifted immediately. "I didn't realize you were so selfish," she snapped. That was it. I hung up. I didn't have the energy to argue. After that call, I didn't hear from Mom for a while. Honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't need the stress, and I definitely didn't need to keep rehashing the same argument about why I wasn't willing to help. But a couple of weeks later, I got a message from Sarah. It was short and to the point. "Can you at least think about helping? This is important to me." I didn't reply. What was I supposed to say? That her important day didn't matter to me after all the years I'd been ignored and overlooked? Mom tried calling again a few days after that, but I let it go to voicemail. Her message was exactly what I expected, guilt-tripping me about family, and how I should be there for my sister. The thing is, I had been there for family. For years, I'd bent over backward trying to earn their support, their approval, anything. But it was never enough. Sarah was always the priority, no matter what. One night I sat in my apartment, thinking about everything. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to just let it go and move on. But another part of me, the bigger part, was tired of always being the one to compromise. They hadn't earned my help, and I wasn't going to give it to them. When Mom called again the next day, I finally picked up. "I told you already, Mom. I'm not helping with the wedding," I said before she could even start. "You're being so cold," she replied. "We're family. Don't you care about that?" "Family?" I said. "Where was family when I needed help? You had money for Sarah's car, for her college, but nothing for me. Now you want me to bail you out?" "No." Mom didn't have much to say after that. She just sighed and hung up. A few days later, Sarah called me herself. I almost didn't pick up, but I figured it was better to deal with it directly than to keep ignoring it. "Hey," she started, her voice way too sweet. "So I heard from Mom that you're not helping with the wedding. What's going on?" I couldn't believe her tone, like this was some minor misunderstanding. "What's going on?" I repeated. "Are you serious? You've been handed everything your whole life, Sarah. Everything. And now you expect me to pitch in for your big day when no one lifted a finger to help me?" She huffed, like she was the one being inconvenienced. "Look, I know things weren't easy for you, but it's not like I had it perfect either. And this is my wedding, okay? It's not just for me, it's for the family." I laughed bitterly. "The family? You mean the same family that didn't care when I was working 12-hour shifts just to pay for classes? The same family that bought you a car while I couldn't even afford bus fare?" "Spare me, Sarah." She got defensive. "I didn't ask for the car. And maybe if you weren't so bitter all the time, things would have been different. That was it." "You're unbelievable," I said. "You've never taken responsibility for anything in your life. I'm done with this conversation." I hung up and turned my phone off for the rest of the day. After that argument with Sarah, I didn't hear from her or my parents for a while. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message. But part of me knew it wasn't over yet. Then one day, Mom showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting her, and when I opened the door, she looked like she'd been crying. "Can we talk?" she asked. I let her in, but I wasn't about to let her guilt-trip me again. She sat down on the couch and started right away. "You know your sister isn't perfect, but she's still your sister. Family is supposed to support each other." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Mom, I've been supporting myself my whole life. Where was this family support when I needed it?" She started with the excuses I'd heard a million times before. "We were doing the best we could. Things were tight back then." "Stop," I interrupted. "You weren't doing your best. You made choices. You chose to help Sarah and leave me to figure it out on my own. And I did. But don't come to me now, years later, asking for favors like nothing happened." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might actually understand. But then she said, "I just don't understand how you can turn your back on your own sister." I couldn't believe it. "I'm not turning my back on her," I said. "I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. And honestly, it's about time someone in this family did." She didn't stay much longer after that. When she left, I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that I stood my ground, but anger that she still didn't get it. After that visit, I didn't hear from Mom, Sarah, or anyone else for weeks. The silence was loud, but it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I kept focusing on my work, my patience, and the life I'd built for myself. One day, I got a text from Sarah. It was just a picture from her wedding, a big, extravagant affair with smiling faces, a fancy venue, and her in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. The caption said, "Wish you could have been there. Still love you, though. I didn't respond. I stared at it for a while, though. Not because I felt guilty, but because it reminded me of how little they'd ever really understood me. A few weeks later, I got another call. This time, it was Dad. I almost ignored it but decided to pick up. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I just wanted to say that I wish things hadn't gone this way. We didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter." I waited, thinking there was a but coming. And of course, there was. "But your sister needed us, and we did what we thought was best at the time." I sighed. "Dad, I don't hate you or Mom or Sarah. I just need space. I worked hard to get here, and I can't keep pretending like the past didn't happen." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I get it. I really do. I just hope one day we can all be close again." "Maybe," I said. "But it's going to take time." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. For the first time, I felt like I didn't need their validation anymore. I'd made it on my own, and that was enough.